All right, so there we go. So now we're recording. Welcome everyone. We haven't seen. Let's see. Where is Tom? Thankfully, it's alphabetically sorting this. Hey, Steve's here. Awesome. Steve's a buddy of mine that lives here in the Dallas area. It was funny. We both happened to use AutoHotkey when we were working together, and we didn't realize we both used AutoHotkey. It was really cool to realize it. And Isaiah, let me make you a just in case I was gonna say die, but that's a bit overwhelming. If my computer crashes or whatever, I'm gonna make you the co-host. Yeah, and that way, the meeting should stay live if for some reason I lose connection.
No problem.
And I think the recording stays going if I remember correctly. So awesome, everyone. Oh, we're right at 9:01. I still don't. Trying to see. I don't see Tom yet, but we were just gonna have a quick intro, just of welcome. We've been planning this thing for months, just getting together and talking about what to cover. Initially, we had planned for a 2-day event, and then there just wasn't a lot of people signing up, and so we scaled it back to 1 day and figured, hey, this is the first one. If it goes well, we'll plan for 2 days. Actually, also in the chat, just for fun, why don't you guys all mention? So Florida, Ireland, West Virginia, Poland, Finland, Montreal. This is awesome. Yeah. Mention also how long you've been using AutoHotkey. I know it's over 10 years, but I can't remember exactly when Isaiah, how long I know it's over 10 for you as well, right?
Well, yeah. Yeah, going 15 almost. It's been a long time since I started with this and still learning. A lot of things to learn anyways.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy? It's people all the time say that. I'm like, there's just, it never ends, which I suppose is a good thing.
It is. It would be pretty boring if you knew everything already of that one topic and then there's nothing else to learn. You get bored pretty quickly. So
I see 2005. So it's Tian's making us do math since 2005. Felipe had 2 years, a couple of months. That's fine, Brian. Yeah, we're all and the other one, I guess, is like, do you have actually a background in programming at all, or is it just you started with AutoHotkey and that's all you've done? 2014. Hey, Dimitri. Welcome. Let me unmute you, Dimitri, just since you're going to be on this first conversation, which will start here in a couple of minutes, of just V1 and V2. Let me see if Tank, because I know Tank was going to see him, and I pinged him earlier. I was going to have him weigh in a bit about the main conversion and switching over and trying to keep the forum sane, is I guess that's the simplest way to say it. Geek dude, yeah, your background, yeah, you're in everything, Geek dude. Programming, awesome. Just AutoHotkey, okay, Philip. That's where I think the problem is. That's funny, yeah. SQL. Brian, I've done a lot of stuff with AutoHotkey with SQL. I don't know if you've seen my video where I use it to help type my SQL, but oh mercy, it saved me so much time writing my templates for joins and whatnot. It's really cool. So we're trying to stick with HK for Cotton. Another Brian.
I like that one of them said like extreme Excel automation, and I'm like, it's not really automating Excel, it's like extreme automation of Excel.
I did some crazy stuff with Excel with AutoHotkey, and man, it saved us so much time. And Jean, yeah, I know you've been working a long time with it. Start with games. Yeah, a lot of people I think start with games, Eugene. And I have no background with coding or programming. Yeah, cool, Robert. No worries. Neither did I, honestly. Okay, so we're at 9:05. Is there anything else we need to get? Let's see. I still don't see Tom. I thought he would be here, but it's fine. So when you have a question, and hopefully you all know this, how to bring up like the question mark symbol. In the emails I sent a hotkey how to do it. So that's what I've done. But you can hold on the Windows key and hit, if you're using Windows 10, or 11. Windows key and either period or Windows key and semicolon, which I don't know why they made it with 2 hotkeys, but put in. So if you had a question, I'm going to do an example here in the chat. So I'm going to type a question mark, okay, and then you would put 3 of those. So something like that. And this will help us spot that as the panel is talking through stuff, if you have a question, it'll help us catch that. Because I'm sure over time, as the meeting goes on, we're going to have a lot of cross chat of people just talking back and forth, which is perfectly fine, right? That's what we want to encourage. This is why we're here, by the way, was to get people to be able to interact with each other. We could have easily just recorded videos and then played them, but that's not fun, right? We want to have the interaction and getting feedback from people and stuff. So yeah, looking forward to it. Okey-doke. Well, anything else? I think we might as well get going here. Oh, was that me in the chat? Awesome.
Perfect.
So let's see. Where are my notes? So yeah, the first one is, and I see Dimitri's here because he was going to be. Dimitri, did I unmute you?
No, I'm muted.
Okay, good. So we were going to first start off. Let me find my notes too, just to help us guide the conversation, right? But I plan, by the way, is to be more of a MC in this event, and I'll still chime in on stuff. I'm going to be watching the chat and try to help administer and let other people do a lot more of the talking than me. So yeah, the first one is, let's just talk about who in here. Oh, actually, you know what? Hold on. I have a poll. I actually created some polls ahead of time. What? No polls are.
Oh man. That's a little bit,
It says no poll. All right. Well, I'll create the poll.
Don't worry. In the meantime, let me go ahead and ask the question.
So yeah, go for it.
Exactly. So basically what we're trying to, one of the first topics that we're going to have today is basically just touch up, and we have our opinions about version 1 of AutoHotkey and version 2 of AutoHotkey, but what we want to hear is actually the community's opinion, your personal opinion as which one which one you prefer, and what we're going to discuss in general is the differences and probably a path forward to see how the community might transition into AutoHotkey 2, or if people are just going to decide whether or not. So the first question would be, have you been using AutoHotkey version 2? Have you not? Do you have any opinions on it? So let's go ahead and see, what can you say in chat?
I'm launching the poll on it.
While the poll is actually launched. There we go.
I thought the polls were general. I created all the polls before, but apparently you have to tie them to a certain meeting. I don't.
Looks like.
Oh, yep. So we're getting some good feedback. It's awesome seeing so many people here, by the way. This is really cool. If we had this many people showing up to the webinars, we probably would have kept them going. But anyway, it's fine. So it's interesting. There's still a lot of people here. And this is really fascinating, given so many people here have also been using AutoHotkey for a long time. And maybe that's part of why they're not wanting to switch.
That is right.
But yeah, there's a few people that are, and of course I can't vote on it. I would be started using it, but I was talking to Isaiah yesterday of like, I am sure at some point I will switch, but it's I don't currently have plans directly right away to switch.
I would definitely have answered like going full gangbusters on it. Actually, I started playing with it, and then later on I realized like I don't want to write in V1 anymore, and my brain just switched to it. Sometimes I write code and then I figure out, oh, sorry, that was meant for AutoHotkey version 1. But now my brain is already switched to version 2. So that can also happen. But actually, I see that I'm not in the majority. So I'm very much in the minority of people here. Most of the people seem to have a very specific answer to it, right? Yeah.
Descolata actually trying. That's funny. Hey, Descolata, it's good to see you here. He's waiting for fine text to be ported to version 2, which is a really interesting point as well, right? It's like some people we have a lot of libraries that we use and they're not available in V2, and until they are, maybe we don't switch to that. But a lot of the newer stuff only available in version 2, so it makes it a little tricky.
Yes, it does.
And Joe, also a lot of libraries are getting converted. So And you also see that actually the high level programmers who most of the time maintain the libraries, they also start switching to version 2.
Right. So yeah, so right now there's a lot of people who,
Haven't touched it.
and I saw
probably-
someone saying I had an option in there I didn't list, but this is, I freehand typed it in 30 seconds. So cut me a little
Yeah.
slack, please.
Now, here's the thing. What I'm actually kind of interested right now is there's two answers in one of them that is not touched and don't plan to. So now here's the thing. How many people haven't touched it but are planning to? And how many people really don't plan to switch? That in there, I don't know what the percentage would be, but a lot of people haven't touched AutoHotkey for sure. So that's like AutoHotkey version 2 for sure. Exactly. So there are some people now answering in the chat, plan to, but haven't installed it yet. And there's a few things that we're going to discuss about that, which is interesting when we have the panel already going. And I have a few things that maybe you don't know about it yet that might be okay for you to later on think about it a little bit better.
Okay, let's start talking about, why don't you one of the two of you. So Dimitri, by the way, he led a webinar in version 2. He's involved with the converter that he mentioned earlier. I guess I should change my notes up above my head here. Let me put in the I have a link to the converter.
Yeah, it existed already, but it wasn't working anymore. So I worked a little bit on it, and it evolved to the new beta version, and I think I did a great job. But of course, it's not. It converts already quite good, but it's not perfect. Of course, some things are really hard to translate. Just it starts to get complex very soon. And another thing is, most of the time you can shorten your code in V2. It's easier, by my opinion.
I'm loving Brian M's comment. Windows Vista cured my addiction to shiny new toys, which that is hilarious.
That is actually a very, very true statement.
Well, you know what though, is what I would say is if Windows Vista had been in beta for 10 years, maybe it wouldn't have been such a colossal, crappy tool. Where in version 2, it's been worked on
forever.
Yeah.
That guy, he's really, really specific. He wants everything to be working just fine,
Well, yeah, why don't you guys go ahead and keep on talking a little bit about some of the things that you'll run into when you start switching to version 2. Some of the real pros I know from Dimitri talking to him is just the GUI stuff is so much more straightforward, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So
And
I would let you, Dimitri, go ahead because you have actually a little bit more experience and have more in-depth information about how AutoHotkey version 2 works. What is it that you like the most?
the fat arrow functions are really helpful to shorten your code, but yeah, maybe some people find it too advanced, but once you get to know it, then it's quite useful. Wait, I for example, I've made a quick example. I'll share my screen. Here. So in version 1, if you want to make a small menu that just shows a message box, you actually need to do it in 2 parts. One part is to define the menu, of course, and the other one is to handle the menu. But in version 2, yeah, you can just write it as just one line to add one. Yeah, it's way easier. And this is actually a fat arrow function, so you just it's almost the same as a handler, but it accepts those parameters. And then, for example, I could say, give me the item name. Let's try it. No. So that gives me the item 1. So
Right. So basically, for those who are not familiar with arrow functions, in general, in AutoHotkey version 2, at least, it might work differently in other languages, but in AutoHotkey version 2, it's just like if you have a function that only has one statement, you can actually compound statements with a comma or something like that, but it is meant for, if you have just one action, the arrow is the same as saying return. That's what it is. So return message box, and it's just that one thing that you're going to do. So it allows you to very quickly make one action statements in the same line. For example, if you just click on the close command, on the close, the X button on your GUI, you just want to close the window. You don't want to display a message and then do this and do that and then close most of the time. So if you just want to perform one action, a fat arrow function allows you to just have one line of code instead of having to define a function as we usually do, which is a little bit more annoying. But not everybody likes the arrow functions because they can be confusing most of the time. But again, for set timers, for message boxes and stuff like that, having an arrow function syntax helps a lot in many cases. So that's basically what you like the most, Dimitri. Is there anything else that you like about AutoHotkey version 2?
It's also nice that you can define functions inside functions. So if you specifically only want to use them in that section, then they're really closed off of the other and they will not interfere in the rest of the code. That's also something that is very clean.
I actually definitely was talking about that recently with Joe. I just figured out that I could actually define a function inside a function. And that usually happens when you have code, you have a function, right, that performs some actions, but you don't want those actions to be available outside of the code. That right away makes it so much easier to just define it inside that function, use it, and then nobody outside of the code, you cannot use that function anymore. I really love that. And I had some instances and I wanted that to happen. And in AutoHotkey version 1, you cannot do that. So basically, it is a little bit better for me to control what is outside of, what can be used outside of my function, by the way.
And another big advantage is that you know all the time how the parameters are interpreted, because in version 2 it's sometimes possible, for example, for message box, the first parameter is in text form. So if you say message box and some text, then it doesn't need to be quoted. But in version 2, you know that it's always interpreted as a variable. So it's always the same thing. And V1 is messing that up. And that's maybe useful and for some people, but yeah, it's not always the same thing. So you always need to look back into the documentation to know, or just test it out to know what the correct thing is.
Now, I've seen two questions in the chat that I would like to kind of like address. One of them, I think Anthony was saying, does AutoHotkey version 2 use JavaScript for programming? No, not really. But there is a few things that look very similar to JavaScript. And some people don't like that. Some people do. So that's where the split opinion comes in, because some people don't like the, JavaScript-like kind of syntax. Now, my opinion on the matter would be, if something is really popular, it might be because they're doing something right. So it is good to capture the things that are right and make it your own. The things that are not right, don't take them. For example, I really hate the triple equal sign in JavaScript. I don't know who came up with that one. I wouldn't want that in AutoHotkey. We don't have it, and that's okay. But the fat arrow function has very good use cases, and for that reason, I definitely welcome that particular addition. So It usually depends. There are some things that I don't like, and I hope that they are not integrated. But in any case, it's not really JavaScript. It's just JavaScript-like. And the other person, I think, somebody was asking how difficult it is to switch your environment. That was John, from version 1 to version 2 when you have projects in both versions. When you install the new AutoHotkey version 2 installer, the beta installer, it automatically sets up the system in a way that when you double click an AutoHotkey script that is for version 1, it automatically launches with version 1. If you double click a script that is for version 2, it automatically launches with AutoHotkey version 2. It is kind of like a launcher that decides with version to run. And you can configure it. You can disable that, or you can use, which I would recommend, as Geek Dude actually mentioned, the requires. It is kind of like a directive that you can put on top of your script that says requires AutoHotkey and the version that it requires. And the launcher that I'm referring to sees that requirement and decides automatically which version of AutoHotkey to run. So basically right now, as of beta 7, or I think as of beta 3 or something like that, you can install AutoHotkey version 2, and you can have AutoHotkey version 1 scripts and AutoHotkey version 2 scripts with the same extension .ahk, and the launcher will decide for you automatically which one to launch based on the requirement. And if you don't have the requirement, it would try to read the code and figure out if it is just for version 1 or version 2. If it cannot figure it out, it at the end gives you kind of like a pop-up for you to decide if that script was for one or the other. So it has a very nice fallbacks to really launch the script however you. So switching to version 2 right now is not that hard, and you can still use your scripts normally. I think, Joe, you might want to mention what issues you ran into with that particular type of, the launcher.
It was just really odd. There was, even though we had the requires, which by the way, and I put the link up earlier, we released a tool to go through. If you haven't touched V2 yet, now is a great time to, and write your own script if you don't want to use ours, we don't care. But to add requires and add the version 1.1, if that's what you're using, into all of your scripts. So when you do start adding version 2, it's simpler, because right now everything you've done in version 1, so it's really simple, right? Probably. But yeah. And in mine, unfortunately, even though, because if it doesn't have the requires, it tries to look at your code and determine, make a decision. But even though we had the requires in our scripts, mine were taking, what would you say, like 2 seconds or so to launch? Like it was really noticeably slow, which we couldn't figure it out.
I couldn't figure it out because in my case, it was not happening like that. So we didn't know if it was something about the machine or the setup where AutoHotkey was installed. But yeah, you have to keep in mind that as it is trying to decide stuff, it might take a little while. We cannot determine exactly what was the issue, but it might happen. Now, somebody was asking is that if fat arrow functions can always be, if you can write anonymous functions instead of storing the function in a variable. Yes, that is right. With fat arrow functions, you can definitely just write the parameters of the function without the name, and then the arrow function would go ahead and perform the action. But it is not saved in a variable, so you cannot refer back to it again. It is for one-time use kind of thing. So set timers and stuff like that would be a good example of where I would use a fat arrow function. Yeah, that's basically how it works.
Zeus, have you, Geek Dude asked an interesting question. Have you had it where you have, we talked about this just the other day, having more than one require statement in a script?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I would assume that the script would pick one of the two. I don't think it will give me an error, and I can definitely just try it out real quick. So let me share my screen real quick.
Yeah, I think it's good practice, certainly in libraries, because it could get confusing if you have version 2 and version 1 libraries.
What we actually ran into the other day was, Zeus has been, because he does write some of our work, he worked with me in version 2, and he was putting the requires in the main script. However, if we're referring to a library, he wasn't putting it in there, and that actually isn't that what happened, Isaias? That one of the sub things.
Yeah. So let me verify what happens if I have the two. So right now, it actually is grabbing the second requirement. It says V2, but I have 1.3. So let me see if I switch this to the top. So I'm not getting an error because of having the two requirements, but it looks like it grabs the last requirement. No, it actually goes with the highest requirement. It doesn't matter where it's located at.
Yeah, it's logical, the first one that he encounters.
Right. Well, no. So basically I put it at the bottom and it would still actually tell me that I need version 2. Oh, look at that. It's still, none of them would work. So it doesn't matter which one I choose. It is actually doing it's just choosing the opposite of what I'm running it with. So in any case, it is not a good idea to have the two requirements right now. I would say, like, what I would suggest, I would probably put it on the forum as a wish list, is that the script grabs the highest requirement available, or probably the lowest, just to pick one, right? So, but right now it's just picking the opposite of what I'm running it with, which is funny. It was unexpected right there, but yeah.
If you're requiring both, you're either much smarter than us, or or you're having some problems.
But I think it should just grab either the minimum requirement. So if you're requiring version 1 at least, it should grab that one and forget about the rest, maybe.
Do we have anything else on specifically around the pros and cons? Because I think also, you guys talked about some of the pros. I didn't hear anybody mention cons for V2. Does anyone?
Of course, you have the annoying thing that if you want to use a variable, you first need to define it. And actually, at first, I really hated it because it was annoying and you needed an extra line to do in a lot of times. But in the end, it's actually better because that way you detect error a lot faster. So it's actually an advantage.
Okay.
However, this is the thing, Dimitri. With AutoHotkey, this is the thing that, like, I think most people and a lot of people here also said they've never used any other programming language, and that AutoHotkey is often the first language you start with. And you just mentioned a thing of like, yeah, it's kind of annoying, but it's more efficient, right? Which is what people who've been using AutoHotkey for years often care about, right? But when you're first starting out, I can tell you, 15 years ago, I took a class at VBA. It was online, and that stupid having to define my variables first before I could do anything was one of the big reasons why I finally just said, screw it. I'm not doing this. It was so ridiculous to have to go do some of the stuff. I'm just saying, like, you got to get in the mindset of someone who's never programmed before. And to me, this is something that can really stop people. And it's one of the, to me, it's a big negative. It doesn't sound like it, for people who are programmers, but if you're not a programmer, it's a much bigger deal than you suspect.
But I think the annoying thing was that you needed to define the type. And that was, for starters, it's annoying to know what's the type. I don't know. It's an integer, a double. It's always something that you need to learn. But with AutoHotkey, you don't need to define the type. You just need to say, it exists.
Right, and this is actually the divide that exists. You have people who are not programmers and they just want to express what they are thinking. I just want to verify if this path exists and do something. I don't want to deal with the fact that whether the variable is set or not set. That is a concept that is a very programming concept, like whether the variable is set or not. Joe argues that as you're not a programmer, like, you don't care about it, and it could put you off if you have to actually go ahead and deal with those type of things. Now, on the other side, you have the people who are programmers, who have been programming for a little while. Not only they are programmers in AutoHotkey, they probably have seen other languages. And then you start getting these little issues, especially when the projects are big. Say, for example, John Lalonde. He has a very big project with 23 or 30,000 lines of code. And if he runs that code and there's a variable that is not set, he will not figure that one out until sometime in the future, somebody tells him, hey, this thing is not working right. And now he has to hunt down why it is. And then he figures out, oh, that variable has no value in it. In AutoHotkey version 2, what is aiming to do with that is just, as soon as you type it, if you try to run the program, it will automatically tell you, hey, it looks like this variable, you have never assigned a variable to it. Is that okay? Do you really want to do that? If you say okay, it will continue running fine, but it warned you about it. Now, some people find that warning annoying, and that's what comes about. But rest assured, you can turn off that particular warning. You can use the warn directive to turn that off. And let me show you something interesting that probably you didn't know. And basically, it is that you can always, now in the newest version, try to use an unset variable. And you can use the maybe operand, these 2 question marks. If you put 2 question marks, it will check if that variable is set and use it. If not, then you can use a default value, whatever you want. It could be a text, it could be a string or whatever. Just think about it as the ternary operator, but instead of checking for 2 options, it's just checking whether the variable is set or not. So that would remove the warning. So right now, if I make sure that I'm running with version 2, right now, if I make it like this, it would give me a warning. Oh, hey, this variable has never been assigned a value, right? Or if I use the maybe operand, it would decide to whether, if it is set, use its value. If not, just show false. And I don't get a warning anymore. So this is something that if you are annoyed at the fact that you get this type of warnings, just make sure, if you haven't actually defined or declared your variable, just use the maybe operand, which is 2 question marks, and it is not going to give you that warning anymore because it checks whether it's set or not first. So that's one of the things that you can think. Now, regarding the really, negative things about AutoHotkey version 2, I would say it is the learning curve has increased. Now you have to learn a few more things to be able to do the same things that you were able to do before. So before you were just typing whatever you wanted, and it made sense to you. Now you have a little bit more of a learning curve, especially because many commands that you're used to kind of like switched some things. Like, for example, the message box command, sometimes you put the options first, then the title, and then the text. That's what we are used to. But now in version 2, the command parameters are switched. The first parameter is the text, then the options, then the title. And those kind of things kind of like it can throw you off. But with a good lexer or a good environment that gives you the prediction of the command and stuff, that can be lowered a little bit, but still you have a learning curve. Every time I'm using a command now, I find myself trying to figure out whether it works differently in version 2 than in version 1, because some commands work differently, some others don't. So the learning curve just went up a little bit, that's all.
Yeah, and again, it gets back to for noobs, for people who have never programmed before, right? Which is one of the big things why people stumble into AutoHotkey in the first place, right? It was so simple, right? So that to me is just it's for any other language, I'd be like, so what, right? But for AutoHotkey, just given that's a big draw, it's just a little bit concerning. Eugene actually asked an interesting question: is there a compiler for version 2 that, kind of like with AutoHotkey H, that makes it harder for people to easily decode the scripts? Is that, I don't think
right now, no, it is using the same AutoHotkey to exe, the normal compiler that we have been using for a long time. So there is nothing for obfuscating stuff and those kind of things, like protecting it from being decompiled. But I think even though
the stuff, sorry for cutting in there, does it have the what are they called? There's 2, the UPX and what's the other one?
You get the Empress. So those compressing algorithms, you can use them exactly the same as before. The only thing is, as usual, we always tell people, okay, so if I'm a programmer like me, if I'm really interested in getting your code, it doesn't matter how you compile that. Everybody,
it's the lock on the door to your home, right? It
it's-
keeps the honest people honest. It doesn't keep the criminals out.
no, exactly. So basically, if there's somebody who is willing to spend the time and has the money and has the resources to grab your code and hack it, they will do it. Adobe cannot stop it. Haven't you seen, like, people in the Pirate Bay using like Adobe Photoshop and stuff?
Microsoft, yeah.
Microsoft cannot stop it. Facebook, nobody can really stop hackers. If they are really interested into it, they will do it. Now, does that mean I shouldn't compile or make sure that it's not? No, you should. The only thing is that I want to just make clear, doesn't matter how hard you try. There is someone out there that is going to do it, but they're the minority of people. Most of the people don't have the time. They're not interested.
Or knowledge.
Or the knowledge. So in the end, it's not worth spending too much time and effort in something that a normal compilation, compression, and removing some text would do the trick with it. That's
Well,
it.
And which we covered, and my IP lawyer did a webinar years back, but nothing's changed really, right? He did a really good thing, talk through what you can do to protect yourself. One of the cool tips was just, hey, embed like your kids' birthdays or your spouse's birthdays and stuff in the text. And then that way, because someone, have them hidden in there, right? Don't make it obvious. And that way later, if you ever have to go to court or just go to even in person and say, you ripped me off, they're like, no, I didn't. You're like, well, then why are my kids' birthdays in your code? Please explain that to me, right? So it's a fun little thing that you can do.
That's an interesting one.
It may not be worth spending the money to fight it, but it gives you at least something to complain about. I saw Geek Dude mentioned he laments the removal of the plain text to where you could just assign, variable to text, especially if it had the double quotes in it, which I'm totally with you there, Geek Dude. I was really, really disheartened when I heard that was going away until I realized, like Python, in other languages, you can use either the single quotes or the double quotes to wrap your text. And then I was like, oh, thank God. Okay, it's not
Actually,
but it's still, without that would have sucked.
I saw a question there that I don't really understand it. It is Ahmed, I think. Ahmed X says, like, in V2, you have to replace the go-tos referencing a label, which is more modern in programming. Do we have to do this for hotkeys too, like GoSub hotkey? I think the idea of labels in general, we don't use it that often anymore. There's a reason for that, because labels, when you use them, the variables are global. And that usually is not a good idea in programming. So we're moving away from labels. It's not that they're bad, is that it creates a little bit of a problem when debugging for people who are programmers, by the way. If you're not a programmer, you really don't care about that. If your script is very small, you're not going to care about that. But in general, as soon as you start moving up very more complex programs, having a lot of global variables is a problem. Now, do we have to do this for hotkeys like GoSub? You can still use the GoSub command. You can still use it for hotkeys as usual, but now hotkeys and hot strings act as a function because you have to put the brackets around them for it to work. So they're really functions, by the way. I would definitely stop using labels in general, because we're moving away from the labels in general. But you can use functions or hotkeys and use the GoSub for them, but not for the functions, because functions, you don't have to use a GoSub. You just call the function itself. So
I always say, a function is basically a GoSub, on
it is.
It allows you to pass some parameters to it. And it is by far, and I was preaching this the other day, by far, if you're not, building your own and using functions, it is the lowest hanging fruit ever in programming. It is the thing that will just change your game. If you're not using functions, learn how to use functions. It's crazy how powerful.
That is right.
Go.
Now, there's somebody asking if AHK is really simple. So it is a very good question. But I would say, compared to other languages, I think I remember once, Joe, that I was showing you a function in Stack Overflow of somebody that wanted to send some hotkeys, some keystrokes into a window, and he was doing it in the C++ language, and it was a wall of text. And then in the end, he was just sending 2 keys. And I was like, in AutoHotkey, we do that in 1 line. That's it. Now, it is not about whether AutoHotkey is simple or not. In AutoHotkey, it's simpler to do certain things.
Right.
Because as soon as you try to do other things, AutoHotkey is a nightmare. I would tell you, there's some things that without AutoHotkey are really complicated to do, whether it's version 1 or version 2. AutoHotkey is not designed for certain types of actions, right? So always use the best tool for the best thing, you know, for your particular situation. AutoHotkey is great for creating hotkeys, creating hot strings, automating GUIs, and in general, trying to use COM objects. As soon as you start moving away from that, things get more and more complicated. So yes, AutoHotkey is simple in what it was built for, nothing else.
Now, the next thing I'd like to shift part of, we can continue on if there's specific questions, but in very specific thing, like years and years ago, I was learning Python. And when I happened to be learning Python was when it was switching from version 2 to version 3. And it took forever to make that transition. And also it was so confusing. Actually, at the same time, AutoHotkey was going from the vanilla 1.0 to 1.1. And if you guys that have been around long enough remember what the forum was like then, it was so confusing. You know, thankfully the version 1.0 to 1.1 syntax was so different, even for someone like me who at the time had never done any sort of programming and especially OOP type stuff. It was fairly simple to go, this is different, right? These two things aren't the same. Now, where I'm going with this is just, we need to make sure as a community, how are we going to make sure, besides using the requires command, which I think is a must, every post like to the forum or Reddit or wherever, needs to have that requires in there. But how are we going to make sure that we have a better transition than other languages have done? Because it can be really a nightmare.
Yeah, actually, as you just mentioned, if you're sharing code, any of you guys, if you're here, if you're going to the to the forum to post stuff, whenever you put a piece of code, try to add the requirement there so that we know what you're talking about. But in general, the function right now is divided into 2 sections. You have the AutoHotkey help for version 1 and the AutoHotkey help for version 2. So we are expecting that you go to the right section of the forum. But again, later on, what happens if we are going to, if AutoHotkey version 2 becomes the main version of AutoHotkey and the forum gets merged, then we will have some legacy code in there that we might not know that is legacy. So it's good to just put your requirements in any piece of code that you're sharing so that we know basically what it's all about.
Yeah, I always found it strange that we didn't use a different extension to just make it easy to separate the 2 versions. But yeah, it's only temporary. Once we have all converted everybody to V2, it's fixed.
Well,
I really doubt that's going to happen.
I don't think this came up earlier, right? But one of maybe it got mentioned, but a whole thing with the V1 versus V2, the pros and cons. V1, there's an insane amount of libraries, and posts and support available. And V2, and someone mentioned in the chat, they're relying on videos, and there are not many people I know, as you've mentioned, you're going to try to make a few videos, more videos on it, but there's not a lot of videos on it, right? Nor is there a lot of libraries and posts on it. And it's just one of those things like that. Hey, the message boards on AutoHotkey aren't going away,
Yeah.
So are we? And I had talked to Tank, Tank is the admin of the main admin for the AutoHotkey forum. He's going to join here in a while, by the way. I pinged him. But the question is, should we have a different sub forum? Should we have an entirely different website? That would be one simple way to make it easier to know. But then we'd probably lose a lot of people in that.
That's the problem. It would split the community in a way that it is not like a very good thing. Now, I really doubt that AutoHotkey version 1 is going to go away anytime soon, because there's a lot of critical scripts out there. That's the other thing you don't even know, but there's a lot of programs that are written in AutoHotkey. I have seen them, like I open them and then I go like, huh, this looks like AutoHotkey, and sure enough, it is.
Look at how VBA, is still in Excel, and this is from how long ago? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so
gonna
it
be
is
around.
it's going to be around for a long time. Now, whether version 2 gets adopted quickly, and if it is better, that remains to be seen. Now, for the older people, like the people who have been coding in AutoHotkey for a long time, we might switch. Now, after a while, when a lot of people have been using AutoHotkey version 2 for a while, the newcomers, what they're going to find is version 2, and they're going to learn it from the start without understanding version 1. So I think the people who have been using version 1 for a long time will have a harder time switching than the newcomers who just arrive and see version 2, and that's how it is. I think for now, the question of how the community would move, I think it's not going to move that much right now. Right now, it's going to stay very, very.
What I was going to say is I hear you, and I don't actually disagree. However, the one caveat I'll throw in there, just because I know I've talked to Tank a lot about this topic. If you remember, it was quite a while ago now, I don't know, 8 years ago, wherever, when the new forum came up, because whoever it was wasn't managing the old forum, and Tank he's like, I'm just going to create a new forum and see, because this other person's not managing the current one properly. I'm going to create a new one. And the amount of people that switched over and started using it was crazy. How fast people did
it.
It was really amazing. And then I think it was Polythene, as I was, finally saw that like the change and realized, you know what, there is a big drive. People want this, so okay, we'll revert the older forums to the newer one. So anyway, it negated the whole thing.
Right.
It was just to throw it out there. If like, man, people are willing to move around. It was really interesting.
I would say, like, if the older version has enough problems that people want to move away from it, that would be great. But I think with AutoHotkey, that's not the case. AutoHotkey was working very fine for a long time. People are even asking, why do we need to switch? But here's the thing, it happened with AutoHotkey L. It was what is called at the beginning. So we had version 1 of AutoHotkey and then AutoHotkey L, and everybody was like, why would I want COM objects? Like, I don't want that. In the end, when we switched, now nobody uses version 1. I think with a little bit of time, it might happen similarly to version 2. I, by mistake, switched. And after I started using it, my brain is thinking AutoHot version 2. I don't want to go
accidentally wrote one of our scripts the other day in it. That's
what I mean. And I just noticed the problem when you mentioned it. Hey, please, this thing with AutoHot version 2, I'm not into that right now. And I'm just like, did I write that in version 2? Yeah, because it's simpler. You will see.
And I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Ahrian, Aaron. I'm not sure if that's how you say it. But what I would say is what you're saying. There's, no one's disagreeing that it's going to be messy. What we're trying to do is minimize the mess, right? Like, yes. I think everyone agrees it's not going to be fun, but hey, I don't know if thankfully compared to like Python and other languages, we for the most part have one forum, we have one Reddit, we have one of these things, right? And so I think there's a chance if we actually get together as a community and agree on something, there's a chance that we can actually really help facilitate that change, right? Compared to the other languages that were so vast and so many different things. Good Lord, what a mess, right? Like I agree with those. I don't know how it's much harder.
That is correct.
Yeah, I created the converter, so that should help.
A little bit. Yeah.
Because now on the forum, sometimes you get a question. Yeah, I'm trying to convert it to version 2. And I just put it into my converter, and most of the time it works fine.
Yep.
Awesome. There you go.
Cool. Is there anyone else got anything else you want to talk about on V2 and V1 and Let me go find my notes and see if was there anything else that we had lined out. I don't think there was.
I would just simply remind everybody that it seems to be that the newest libraries are being done for AutoHotkey version 2. Right now, yesterday, I was speaking to one of our clients and we were having a lot of issues with the Internet Explorer control. And then we saw that there's a developer, a Chinese developer called Tikbai. I don't know how to pronounce his name. And he created a library for the WebView 2 controller. I'm not really sure if that library is available for version 1 of AutoHotkey. I know that it is for version 2. And that means if you want to use something better than Internet Explorer, you will be forced to use version 2 if there is no library available for version 1. So the most active developers and the ones who are actually kind of like on top of AutoHotkey, they're creating stuff for version 2. So it might feel like you will need to use it.
You know what? I have a great question because I was writing back and forth with Geeswig the other day, and Geeswig he's doing a lot of development on version 2, helping Lexicos. And then he also backports a lot of stuff, new functionality that's in V2 back to V1. And I told him my personal opinion was, I think this prevents people from making the switch, right? Like that new functionality is going to make people switch. That's why they would switch. He had the exact opposite opinion. He thought if people adapted their V1 to use those things, it's simpler to switch to V2, right? I'm curious what you guys think. Like, I don't think there's a quote unquote right answer, right? But I am curious what you guys think about that. Do you think backporting some of the new functionality to V1 is a good thing, or is it going to keep V1 around longer?
My opinion would be that it would become a little bit messy. Then you would have, it would be chaos in V2 language.
No, that is right. But the thing is, a lot of people do not see the fact that there are not many developers available for AutoHotkey. So if there were like a bunch of developers for AutoHotkey version 1, I think backporting would be great. And if there's a problem, they can fix it. But now you have this guy, which is Lexicos, focused on AutoHotkey version 2. And he's a person who I've noticed that he has this strong will of making this thing. Just imagine 10 years just thinking about that one thing, that he has a very strong will. He is right now not interested at all in backporting stuff to AutoHotkey version 1, because that would distract him from version 2, because as soon as something is not working as it's supposed to be, he's not going to be able to go ahead and fix that and AutoHotkey version 2 at the same time. So he's not interested in that. If there are developers out here who have the skill to actually go ahead and do the backporting, I would assume that at some point, that is possible. But whether that will keep people to switch from switching to AutoHotkey version 2, I definitely think so. If you're comfortable in one thing and now that thing has the same things as the other thing, then why do I need to change to the other thing? That's basically what is going to happen.
There are actually libraries who try to add V2 functions into version 1. So it's not that complicated, but then you need to use a library.
Awesome. Does anyone else have if they want to chime in on this? We got a couple more minutes before we're switching over. I see is the SQLite 3.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, a MySQL. I saw Cook. Maestrieth, I saw you're here. No, never mind, because I know you haven't switched to V2. I was going to ask you because I know you created a library for us with MySQL, but I don't think you've actually done anything with it. And Maestrieth, I don't know if you want to chime in here. Have you yet looked at V2?
I have not had time, no, unfortunately.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for joining. The next one, actually, hopefully you're going to stay around because I was hoping you would help answer some questions to it, which we'll switch to in just a minute. But we're going to be talking about best programming approach and which one you want to take and why. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Anyone else got anything else? Last chance. Is there anything new you've done in V2 that you were like amazed? Actually, you know what, Isaias, a perfect example is that crazy executing JavaScript within V2, you know, within AutoHotkey, using the methods like JavaScript methods within AutoHotkey. We did a video on it because it was just it melted my brain of how it was working.
So for people who are actually familiarized or code a lot in JavaScript, there was a library, and again, this is what I meant. This library, for now, I have only seen it for version 2. It was created by Lexicus, and again, he doesn't care about version 1, so he just made it for version 2. And it allows you to kind of create an object, and it reads JavaScript, like real, you know, normal JavaScript functions, and it converts those JavaScript functions into code that can be executed in AutoHotkey syntax. I don't know if I could take the last 4 minutes to just show a little example of that. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. And this is something, let me just go ahead and this. No, that's not what I meant. So we have this particular project. Yeah, I'll save that. In this particular project, we're working for a person who needed some very particular way of working with some, how do I say, some information from Word and stuff like that, but he is a JavaScript coder and he already had functions created. So what I did is that I loaded this particular function right here, which is a class. And I read his functions, which are in this particular JavaScript file, and then I executed that because it is a code. I just executed it. At the beginning, you don't think nothing is happening, but what this did is that it grabbed all the functions that are defined in this particular JavaScript code that he had on already. And now later on, I can just call my object with the name of his function. So this function here, or this method, is not defined in AutoHotkey at all. This was defined in his JavaScript code in here, but now I can call it as if it was AutoHotkey code normally, which was something that blew my mind. It was great. It was very interesting. And we actually got it very, and just to show you, let me double check here. This is basically how it looks like. So the code that he wrote is pure JavaScript code. And basically the only thing that he did was this is the function that he defined, and he defined it purely in JavaScript, as you can tell. And basically he did his thing. He knows how to code in JavaScript, but he was not familiarized with AutoHotkey, and he wanted his function to work in Windows. And that's the reason why we kind of like try to bridge the gap between his code and AutoHotkey. And we got this thing working in a very, very interesting way that, yeah, again, this library that can do that is using the Chakra engine, which is the Edge engine, to run the JavaScript code, but it's only available for version 2. So there you go.
So a couple more questions here. Actually, let me address the statement first. Geeku had mentioned there's a Discord set for a bot that has for V2, and the bot will run your V2 code and then chat back anything for you to see in a message box, which is pretty awesome. And then Eric was just asking, I assume, is there any HK DLL for V2?
HKO DLL. So AutoHotkey H is the one that has the AutoHotkey DLL, and AutoHotkey H is completely compatible, and it is actually version 2. So it is compatible and with version 2 and has what you're looking for. So what I would recommend you then is just taking a look at AutoHotkey H and verifying the version that it's better for you. The only thing is that AutoHotkey H has a few quirks about using it the first time, which I found it a little bit complex for some people. But definitely that would be the answer for you. You would have to look at AutoHotkey H for it.
And I'll put over my head here, but we actually did a webinar with Hotkey, if I remember correctly, is the author of it. And the other big thing I would say about version H is it's multi-threaded.
Yes. Just to answer that one last question, does anybody has an extension with debugger to work with V2 already? Yes. And the reason why, one of the main reasons why I'm actually coding in AutoHotkey version 2 right now more than version 1 is because the VS Code Lexer and debugger that come with VS Code or that you can download for VS Code, they're amazing. I cannot really state how good they are. So basically, I would definitely recommend you. And now that I have my VS Code open, I can just show this real quick. Let me just 1 second.
We're out of town, Isaiah, so make it
Yes,
fast.
sir. Just take a look at those two, the AutoHotkey 2 language support and the VS Code AutoHotkey debug plugin.
If you go to our page on V2, which I was showing earlier, we
Actually,
have
yeah.
a webinar showing, setting it up, right?
Yep.
The different extensions. So awesome.
Awesome.
All right, cool.
I
So,
see Tank is there.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I flaked
No
about the
worries.
time of day.
I'm going to stop the recording and just so I don't have a nightmare editing these things later, and then I'll start it back up again. So stop recording. Yes.